Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Happy Friday. Pleb Underground, the signal without the slop. I'm your host, Phil. So, I promised you guys I was going to get a guest today and delivered. That's right. Hunter Beast is joining me today on the Pleb Underground to talk about all the quantum stuff, specifically to talk about BIP 360 and do we really have to be concerned? And if so, how concerned should we be? So we're going to have what I believe to be a high level, easy to understand, or as best as easy to understand conversation about quantum, the risks to Bitcoin, what we can do about it. What is this going to look like for you and me as plebs using Bitcoin, right? Anyways, before we bring Hunter Beast onto the stage, you guys know the deal. Got to give a shout out to the Pleb Underground sponsor. It's 2026. Archimedes Emporium. Show them some love, all right? And we're going to be right back. Here we go. Pleb Underground is sponsored by Archimedes Emporium. Discover the pinnacle of precision engineering, starting with their Bitcoin logo wall clock, meticulously machined in Maine from a solid block of aerospace-grade aluminum, ensuring unparalleled durability and performance. Experience the difference of a product made without compromise. Head on over to Archimedes Emporium. That's right, guys. Hunter Beast, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I was just looking at your sponsors technology, Archimedes Emporium, and I was just thinking, man, I wonder if that technology could be used to like finish an AR lower or something.
Indeed it can. Indeed it can.
It's just the first thought that went through my head. I was like, can we make it good with this?
Absolutely. A CNC machine, 100%. 100%. I did make some with my 3D printer. I did get into that, and that was super fun. That was really fun project to actually go and build, right, a pew from scratch. Well, from scratch. You had to buy a couple of pieces, right? But still it's pretty cool. Yeah. So do you are you a 3D printer? I know that this isn't the goal of our conversation, but do you have a 3D printer? Are you interested in this, or are you a CNC dude?
I have some interest in additive, mostly for like molds or something. Like I've done some designs and experimentation, but I'm not sure I want to necessarily invite one of those into my own residence, just because I'm a little conscious of the fact that we're kind of like filling our environment with microplastics.
Yeah. And the first thought is all the microplastics flowing through our organs and stuck in our organs. It's kind of interesting, right? We tend to hear about stuff like that, and then we just, at least for me, right, it goes far back into this place of my brain where I just completely ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist.
Well, it's one of those things that's like, I think could pose a bit of like a existential risk to our existence, really, because microplastics are an endocrine disruptor, and they make people less fertile, and I think for male fertility has dropped like 30% or something like that, that's not good. That's one reason why I think quantum computers and neural network things like AlphaFold, like those are like going to be, I think quantum chemistry and AlphaFold are going to be like really important for our survival as a species in the future, for us to create things like enzymes for like forever chemicals and microplastics.
Before we dive into the quantum stuff, I'm very curious. Do you think it's a giant conspiracy for population control? All of this type of stuff, like all the different narratives, right? Because essentially, what it is you look around at the world and you see multiple narrative traps. Now, every single human being, right, at some point, could be argued, gets trapped in a narrative trap. Now, what I mean to say is, and again, I'm not placing necessarily good or evil on this. I'm just simply saying it is a narrative. So, for example, the atomic family, right? The atomic family is a narrative, and there's people who work towards that goal, right, of the atomic family narrative. And then there's, let's say, the narrative of the lone scientist or something like that, right? This person who decides to never have a family or anything like that. They pour their entire life and everything that they are, their whole life force, right? Like a Mary Curie or something like that, right? They never end up having any offspring.
So
That's the narrative they bought. And then, of course, you have the people who buy the I'm going to be a druggie my entire life and, piss it all away. And then they end up, you get what I mean? All these different narrative traps.
Yeah, I can already think of like two answers to that. There's the normie ass, intellectually honest answer, and then there's like the woo answer.
Can I have both?
I can give you
give me the one you want.
So the intellectually honest, like boring ass normie answer that any LLM will tell you is that they'll probably tell you about Heinlein's razor. I think that's the basically the idea where never attribute to malice that which can be attributed to stupidity. Yeah. So there's that. There's also, that said, some counter narratives, and one that I've been looking into lately quite deeply, and I have no idea if this is true, is I've been reading A Gift from the Stars by Elena Danan, and she's basically like an abductee, and she talks about her UFO experiences, and she goes around and makes money from this, I think, but it's a pretty painful experience and hard to admit to. So like I kind of want to believe her. Anyway, she talks about how like there's this ancient reptilian conspiracy with like there's a few entities in her writing. She talks about the Galactic Federation of Worlds, and then also they run they essentially oppose an insurgency that is like a complex alliance of different competing but somewhat aligned interests. She calls it the Chakar Empire. They're essentially like reptilian draconians from the planet Thuban and the Alpha Draconis star system. And essentially, she says that they've been trying to infiltrate and like basically like coerce us and extract things from us and people from us, essentially. For a little while now. There's something in the ufology circles called the Grayadic Treaty, which is in 1954. Apparently, Eisenhower may have made a deal with aliens, and the deal essentially was like a technology exchange program in return for actually like humans, like human trafficking, essentially. And
none of this would surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. I'm not. There's no ontological shock on my part either, other than just that. Oh yeah, that sucks.
Yeah.
That's dark if it's true. You know, she talks about like really weird, dark shit, like soul scalping and like, but she talks about souls a lot. Actually, it's kind of interesting. Like she says, it's a soul is a fractal from what she calls the source density, which is the 13th density, and density is different than a dimension or a multiverse. I'm still trying to figure that out. But anyway, I just find that fascinating. And so like the thing is like, she talks about like hybridization. She talks about how they do kind of want to have a population control style narrative. So yeah, it's there's some there could be like some weird dark stuff that's literally like underground. Like we don't really know how to acknowledge it or deal with it.
Yeah, I could believe that. I could believe that. It's and especially that whole, essentially the battle in the stars. It's interesting, right? Because something that you'll notice about all of these. So I don't know how much you've paid attention to a lot of these abductee accounts or recollections, but you'll notice that all of their stories are incredibly similar. And some of these people, right? Like, let's be honest, it's people from all over the world that have. I guess we can take an easy guess to say, they've never spoken or anything like that. But you have to imagine that people from different cultures experiencing the exact same thing. Like at some point, it seems that it's very difficult to say that this is not happening.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, there's literally like, I think almost 100,000 MUFON reports now, the Mutual Network. And, they, like, and and any inconsistencies or like lack of overlap could just simply be attributed to the fact that there's a lot of distinct visitors coming to this
Mm.
planet for a variety of different reasons. This could be actually a very loud, noisy galaxy if we only knew how to listen. Like the thing is, a lot of people think about with the Fermi paradox, like, we keep listening for radio waves, but radio waves are not a good way to communicate if you compare it to sort of like the idealized science fiction Ansible concept of a FTL communicator, right? And so, like physicists these days, fucking normie ass academic scholars, they're just like in their ivory tower. They're so frustratingly close-minded because they're essentially indoctrinated by their institutions to think that certain things are impossible when they could just be
Mhm.
simply an engineering constraint. Like maybe you just devise a protocol. Maybe we need better quantum computers to solve what they call the no signaling or no communication theorem.
So it's interesting you bring that up because many, I wouldn't say necessarily many inventors, but something that most people end up encountering, right, when they're doing this type of research or trying to come up with breakthroughs and whatnot, there is a moment where they have to cross the abyss, right? They have no idea what's on the other side of that abyss. I think one of the best stories that I heard to illustrate that was the story of Henry Ford with the V8 motor, right? Like nobody had ever made one of these work, nobody had ever conceived of it, and he just didn't care. Right, like right. All of his engineers were telling him, "Look, it's just impossible. Right, we can't do a single block V8." And he's like, "I don't care." He's like, "Just figure it out." And it's almost like that point in the abyss, and it's so strange, right? That these guys they know so much that the cup is completely full, right? So if they believe that it's impossible, therefore it must be.
Exactly.
Right? Like it's so crazy.
It's happened throughout history. It's like a tragic irony, and it's so frustrating for innovators and entrepreneurs and people with an imagination and creativity, which is kind of like one of the more redeeming qualities of humanity. We just kind of get like sidelined and boxed in and told that no, this is impossible by experts. For example, there was like a famous I'll call him a scientist. Like at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, he actually no, it was actually only a few months before I think it was the 1904 Wright flight. He was saying that essentially, essentially, that like heavier than air flight would require materials we did not have and techniques and propulsion systems that we were just simply incapable of and probably wouldn't be capable of it for thousands of years. And then like just a few weeks later, like 6 weeks later, I think the Wright brothers took their first flight in Kitty Hawk. And so and then also they said some other things of like splitting the atom. And then like I think it was I think it was like Niels Bohr or something. Or no, maybe was it Niels Bohr? There was some like physicist who was just like, nah, like there's no way we can like subdivide an atom. And atoms are supposed to be atomic. They're not supposed to be like there's no subatomic was kind of considered a like a oxymoron, right? Because and so they're supposed to be indivisible. And then maybe 12 years later in a Chicago squash court, some guy just was like, yeah, let's put a bunch of graphite blocks in a pile and see what we can do. And yeah, I mean, it's at like 0 to 1 moment where you're surrounded by haters, and then you're just like, but somebody does it anyway.
That's what I love. Right? Somebody does it it's like, why not? Right? Like it's kind of funny. I don't know if it just has to do with early on in the process of this type of of this type of stuff, but essentially there's a certain period of time where you're just figuring out everything that doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like there's a certain period of time where everything exactly. It's like but it's like if you don't do this, you will never arrive at the things that can work. or
I
at least
was
that's
actually
the way I've
just
seen it.
watching a really good Veritasium video. Derek Muller, right, famous YouTuber.
Mhm.
He did I think just the past couple of days an amazing video on how we basically created the EUV machine. And like when people were first thinking about it, they were thinking of X-rays and stuff, and like they didn't even have the name EUV to call it. And they it was just so interesting. Is it was like this like a series of difficult problems that smart people had to put their time and attention to over the course of about, I would say, a good 30 years. Like billions of dollars spent building this technology, and arguably we would not get the scale needed for LLMs uh, to become sufficiently intelligent to like sort of approach AGI without that technology, without EUV, because otherwise it would just be uneconomical. We wouldn't be able to scale. We wouldn't have the transistor. And the thing about LLMs is that it's all about scale. It's all like
It is.
there's two ingredients we two unlocks we needed to sort of like enter the machine intelligence age. Is we first needed like basically like giga level scale, which is like
Mm.
gigabytes, like billions of transistors. Like we needed nine zeros for
Yeah.
that to work, for in terms of like a sufficient number of parameters and weights and things like that. And then additionally, we needed training data from pretty much like half the planet. Like we needed to basically onboard a majority of people on the internet and just get a record of their contributions for like a decade to feed into these digital golems, basically.
So are you saying that we pretty much had to give our data to Google and Microsoft and everybody else in order
Oh,
for this to happen?
it
We pretty
is
much had no choice,
undeniable.
right?
It's undeniable, and the evidence for this, they try to spin it because like they're always like very like cagey about this topic, but
Of course.
and for good reason. But the real evidence for this is that in 2024 there was a big discussion of a problem these models were facing, which was basically the problem of synthetic data that was created by LLMs. If you fed that back in as training data, that would cause what's called a reversion to the mean, or it would just basically make the quality less creative, less capable if you fed the machine's output back into the machine. It needed human creativity and human novelty to sort of expand the statistical latent space of the problem solving of the sampling, and of like autoregressive sampling, right? And so like next token prediction, because if and so what happened was they started watermarking especially image outputs and video outputs so that they
Mhm.
wouldn't be fed back in when they're scraped again. And they said that they basically lied, that their marketing team said this was for copyright compliance and legal, and just like, this is just what we have to do. But no, it served like a more utilitarian purpose, and that purpose exposes essentially a dark truth, which is I think they call it like the bitter pill or something. They have some term for it, but it was basically just that yeah, we wouldn't have modern AI if it wasn't for the collective work of billions of people on this planet.
I like that. I like that. Hey, look, it's the double-edged sword, right? What are we supposed to do? But speaking of AI, right? We're gonna move over to the quantum stuff. Okay, so I look, on one hand, I'm super happy that we're not talking about core versus knots.
That was a
And
really sad debate because
it really was,
because
truly.
like neither side is really wrong. Like I
That's
mean, uh,
they just
first of
don't we
all,
just don't agree on it. It's just not an agreement on how to mitigate this stuff,
well, so I
among
think
other
it's
things.
just a matter of like engineering constraints and priorities, right? Whenever you engineer a system, you have to establish a set of priorities and constraints, and um, essentially the core. developers were cognizant of a couple of attack vectors that could be maybe social attack vectors to change Bitcoin, to maybe say some later proposals would recommend confiscation of UTXOs essentially at the protocol level, which I think is very problematic from a
Yeah,
property
we
rights
saw that.
perspective. But there's also like the concern that we Bitcoin should be remain censorship resistant to an extreme, essentially, to mitigate against potential state actor attacks. So like even if like there was something that was illegal in your jurisdiction put on your node by some degen, I mean that sucks, but that said, like I think the bigger threat is the nation state. And so like regardless of whether and of course like not crowd would tell you, well, CSAM is, it puts you in harm's way of the nation state. It invites their attacks. And then the core devs would be like, well, but we need to resist those attacks. In order to resist those attacks, we need censorship resistance. And so it's a complicated debate, but
It's
ultimately what I would say is that the way I would lean on it is that I support no choice. I think plebs are obviously a big factor in this picture. Um, and their preferences and what they do with their individual private property, which is essentially what a mempool setting is,
hmm
like is absolutely their choice. It's just I don't know how much good it does in the grander scheme of things, but I mean the ultimate, you do you. It's just uh, that said, I don't think mempool policy or relay policy is sufficient to essentially address their concerns. And although I'm generally pretty liberal, in like classically liberal of mind in this concept of just free speech, right?
hmm
But that said, I do not tolerate transactions that could dramatically interfere with the operation of the network, such as what Portland Hodl has been talking about, which are DOS blocks. And
hmm
so when BIP 110 suggested that we reduce the script pub key size, I was like, well, essentially Portland Hodl and not Dathan Ohm, right? They're
hmm
essentially proposing the same thing. It's just the devil's in the details. That said, there's a bunch of other things in BIP 110 that reminded me quite a bit of the early days of BIP 360, where I just kind of threw everything I was thinking about and worried about and what I thought would be the best solution. And like the first draft of BIP 360 is dramatically different from every subsequent draft. Like we at one point it was recommending. So I think we started off with like a different signature algorithm. It was just one. It was called Ski Sign. I was really inspired by it because it had a small it had good properties, but it just, that said, we later learned out that it turned out that it had some serious drawbacks too, in terms of like verification time, which kind of aligns with similar concerns of DOS blocks. It's just a DOS attack vector, but there's also eventually, I think we got even to like four different signature schemes that were recommending in the BIP. And then I invited Ethan Hallman, who was like, bro, like we can't, there's no way this can happen as one BIP. Like there's way too many things for this to be trying to accomplish. We need to whittle this down to sort of like the most conservative, thoughtful change we can think of making to Bitcoin that
Yeah.
would move the needle towards a more ideal solution from where we're currently at. But because like the and unfortunately Taproot would be a really useful way to give people sort of the ability to choose which signature scheme they want to use when they go to spend their coins in their wallet at spend time. So that allows us to essentially design and commit to future PQC schemes that don't necessarily need to be activated right away. That also allows us to essentially like explore different market dynamics, such as like private mempool submission for classical signatures versus post-quantum cryptography for uh, uh, public keys, but like for basically preserving the mempool as a public utility rather than just going to miners directly. Um, not for necessarily for submitting spam, but just for to avoid revealing your public key in advance before the transaction has been mined, which is a crucial feature for quantum resistance, even before BIP 360 is activated, because essentially, or PQC is added, because it essentially gives us like kind of like uh, a no soft fork needed solution that sort of would enable maybe like a quantum resistant bridge like what we're building at Andro. And
Oh, yeah,
go ahead.
no, I just wanted to ask you, what's your current best guess? Because we're gonna back it up, because I just want to give people a feel for the, I guess the real, the real urgency. So what's your current best guess on a quantum computer that might first run a realistic Shor's algorithm instance capable of breaking hold on, SEC PK256, I think it is.
SEC P256K1.
A1? Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
Not Arvin. That's important. That's an important distinction. Yeah.
It is. And yeah, like,
So how far are we?
yeah, how far are we? And like, what would make you like, if what type of a breakthrough would make you all of a sudden be like, all right, we need to speed this up?
Those are two very good questions. So,
Thank you.
the way I'd answer the first question is, are you familiar with the meme like 2 weeks?
Oh, of course, Total Recall.
Yeah.
Come
Well, so like I think a better meme for this scenario is
on.
2 years. Like
Dude.
every time you ask me that question, regardless of the year, I'm just gonna say 2 years.
Okay. So that to me indicates we really just don't know. We don't know
Correct.
until we're gonna know.
Right. Right.
That's what it is. Okay, sorry, continue.
And then look, I'm not a crystal. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a spook. I don't have access to high side or low side or whatever the fuck they have, right? Like, I was looking into that a little bit because of ufology stuff. Apparently, I have something called cybernet, and then there's another thing called like it starts with a J. It's stupid like spook shit that like they like to gossip and it's just it anyway, very fiat. Yeah, like everything the CIA and the NSA does is just kind of despicable, honestly. But anyway, I don't know if you ever heard of like Scott
And it's
Hortman,
only
but
what we
that's
know,
a rabbit hole. But anyway,
right? And it's only what we know. That, like,
yeah,
think about that, right? This is just
yeah,
based on what we
yeah,
know.
yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, like, and thanks to patriots like Snowden, right? Like, and he is a goddamn patriot in my book for essentially
Yes.
like revealing to us all this crazy fucking shit that he had like privileged access to, and that was 12 years ago. Like, we learned about like X key score and Tempora, where they basically record a week's worth of internet. Then we learned about of course, like the warrantless surveillance and wiretapping, and then of course we learned about penetrating hard targets, which they literally had a program that was spending $80 million a year on back then for the express purpose of building a quantum computer for breaking public key cryptography.
And that's just over a decade ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So at this point,
There was a second question you asked me, which was
yes. The second question.
remind
It
me.
had to do with what would make you
Yeah.
what would make you revise your timeline? Like, what would happen?
I'll tell you what is really like a bit of a. I've thought about this a lot, and I think the thing that would make me really concerned is if the government had a sort of mandate on the highest tech firms like PsiQuantum and all of them to essentially like they would have to like give like a top down directive that basically said they cannot use their technology for for breaking cryptography used by other people, basically.
Mm.
Like they might need to like if they issue some kind of like executive order or some kind of like like directive to the rest of the they have ways to do this. I'm not I don't work for the government, so I don't know any of this shit, but I just would imagine that Like they would basically, the thing is, like, any high tech company in the US has basically a political officer, kind of similar to how
Oh,
like China,
100%.
yeah,
Yep,
does their shit. Like, we do the same fucking shit they do. And
100% we do.
it, oh yeah, IBM, Microsoft, they all, yeah, without a doubt. And like if spooks like
Where
were
did
infesting Twitter, like they're gonna be infesting all over the high tech stuff, right? Especially spooky shit like quantum computers. They're gonna be in there. They're gonna basically receive an order that says they have to do their part for national security, which is to essentially like no, basically criminalize or discourage from a legal perspective any kind of anybody doing business with Americans in America would not make use of their technology in a way that could negatively impact ordinary people using public key cryptography. I think that if we see that, that's like a bit of an accelerationary moment, I think.
Yeah, 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 I appreciate that's a good point.
Mhm.
And to your point,
And by the
oh
way,
yeah,
the reason why it's accelerationary, just so you know, is
mm,
if it's in case it's not obvious, is that it essentially makes Bitcoin secured not necessarily by cryptography or proof of work. It's essentially, it starts to become more secured by proof of prison, which is not how it's supposed to be designed. It's not, proof of prison is essentially how the fiat system works, right? It's
yep,
how like basically an unsecured system. It's the only way the government knows how to secure shit without using cryptography, is just to say, oh well, if you misuse it, we'll just punish you. And then, and in order for people to be punished, they also must be surveilled. And so the only way the fiat system works is through surveillance and punishment, and essentially the threat of violence, right? And so and so yeah, it's that's why I think it's like kind of like a worrisome and accelerationary moment for Bitcoin, when a part of our security model becomes essentially, oh well, the United States has a law that says that it won't be attacked.
so speaking of the nation states, because I am also not a statist, so and I can tell by your language you're also not a huge fan of the state, so I think we're going to agree on this one. But
I
um,
just know too much.
so I was scrolling through your feed, of course, right? This is how I come
Mhm.
up with questions and stuff. But so you had mentioned nation state computing rather than something like something sovereign like Bitcoin mining.
Mhm.
Um, do you think, because right now it looks like it's just way too expensive for the average person to gain any kind of footing in quantum computing? So do you? I mean, look, the long
It's
story
kind of
short.
ironic. It's kind of ironic
Yeah.
because there's two ends of it. First of all, IBM will basically like take their scraps and they'll give you 10 minutes of it every month for free. Like,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what you're going to accomplish with 127 qubits, but still, like, noisy qubits. But you can build a circuit. You can play with Qiskit. So there's kind of like that aspect to it. But also, yeah, there's a bunch of shit we don't have access to, and also these are billion-dollar pieces of equipment that have to be usually cited alongside like very complex and expensive cryogenic equipment, because there's two refrigerants they use.
Oh yeah,
They're
the
both
cooling, of
liquid, yeah,
course.
liquid nitrogen and liquid helium, which are not cheap. Not like it costs millions of dollars to run these things. It costs billions to build them, and like people are worried about them taking like a $50 a 50 Bitcoin a 50 Bitcoin block reward from like 2010. Like that's just not 50 Bitcoin is it. It sounds like a lot, but it's not in the context of this fucking crazy shit.
So are we are we at the equivalent in terms of the development cycle, are we at the equivalent of, like, let's say, computers in the 1960s? Like,
Without a doubt.
where it takes,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
where it
think
takes
it's a
like
very
a whole
salient.
room and it's,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's a good comparison.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and then
But
things like
the thing
really
is
started
that,
getting heating up in the 70s, when like okay, so we had the invention of the integrated circuit in the 1960s with IBM System 360, and they had these like programming languages as they started working on instead of just actual machine code. Like like the industry is like maturing in a similar way. I think there's and then when you get to the 70s, they start talking about mini computers,
hmm,
and they hadn't quite got to the personal computer yet, but they were starting to democratize it. That I think the equivalent might happen for institutions first, obviously. Like in the 70s, like computing was still largely an institutional phenomenon. The mainframe, right? It was a powerhouse. There are even like supercomputers from like Cray and stuff they're working on, and but then like in the 80s they had finally sort of democratized that, and I think we're probably a bit good like 10 or 20 years away from like a democratization of quantum stuff. But even then, we might still find some really valuable stuff to put in consumer hands beforehand. Then hopefully, I'm very optimistic. I mean, the other thing is like when you try to make predictions and timelines like this, where you look at like the 50s and 60s, and you're trying to like extract past performance, is that indicative of future performance?
Yeah.
That in terms of like technological predictions, it's complicated by the fact that technology builds on each other. I mean, Google's Willow project essentially made use of neural networks and machine
Yeah.
learning to essentially optimize how many qubits were needed for quantum error correction. There's IBM and AMD have done a direct deal with each other to essentially IBM will create the quantum computer, but it'll use AMD machine learning accelerator devices to either post process or perform quantum error correction or some other things. And so there's there's a it all builds on each other essentially. Like, and also I think quantum computers will have a very interesting application in the realm of machine learning as well. There's like quantum machine learning, and that's interesting because they're both probabilistic processes. Like which is like classical computers are actually really bad at being random. But
Yeah.
we have ways of creating like pseudo random number generators and stochastic sort of like statistical sampling methods, and uh, but with quantum computers, you don't need any of that. You just need sufficient qubits for the weights, I guess, maybe. But even then, there might be like a way to like super dense code or something. It all depends on a variety of different engineering factors. But yeah, I think like there could be, for example, a quantum nature to consciousness that could explain why we're able to get so much accomplished with only 20 watts of energy. And like basically in order to sort of emulate human level thinking, you need multiple kilowatts, if not even on the order of like almost megawatts of energy, which is kind of interesting, right? That like there's we're just suspiciously efficient, and so there could be something else going on. There's of course Stuart Hameroff's and Sir Roger Penrose's famous theory on orchestrative objective reductance, which is basically like a 20 or 25-year-old theory that basically asserts that microtubules in the brain might have a sort of quantum entanglement nature that we can even sort of like experimentally prove using anesthetics and turning it on and off in ways that don't even make sense. Like how does xenon gas interact with consciousness, because it's a noble gas, it's like what is it doing when it goes into our brain that just basically turns the lights off, and so they have some interesting explanations for that.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to understand any of that.
Totally.
Interesting, but I'm not even gonna pretend. But going back here, because you were just talking about IBM and stuff, so of course, you can't help but think of it. But so maybe this is a two-parter too. How do I say this? How much how much of the current progress, right? Like IBM, Google, like all these other quantum players, like how much of it is, let's say, in your estimation, genuine hardware advancement versus just marketing? Because, and the reason I ask this is because, when we heard, I think it was last year or something like that, there was the Google Willow news, and then all of a sudden, and of course, right, the quantum's going to break Bitcoin, and it's over. Google's already here, and we're just a couple of months away, right? From all like, it's like, come on. And then of course you dive into it for more than 15 seconds and you realize, no,
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 no.
this is
It's
nothing. So sorry. Go ahead.
the way that Peter Willa predicted this would go in 2019 was that he said we would see a long series of incremental improvements.
Mm,
I don't think he was wrong. I think he was
Yeah,
spot on with that. Actually, yeah.
yeah. I think that definitely makes the most sense,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like
It's it's it's
it's
it's
the same
just
thing we saw. Oh, go ahead.
it's kind of disappointing. It's not exciting, right? Like it's not like
Yeah.
oh like this is like a big urgent existential threat to Bitcoin. You know what's going to be that for gold, by the way? 16 Psyche is basically a like a unformed planetary core from like the early formation days of our star system.
Hmm.
Mhm. But anyway, it's like this big exposed like metallic core, and so it's like a bunch of metals out there in space, and it's massive. And NASA actually sent a mission to that, and it'll arrive like I think in 2029 maybe. And if it just turns its uh, instruments on it, like a
Yeah.
an interferometer, and it just like says, "Oh yeah, there's a bunch of gold and there's a bunch of heavy metals in this asteroid, just there for the
Uh-oh.
taking." Yeah, that I think is probably a much bigger existential threat to not only gold bugs but also like central banks, which are the largest holders of gold. And so yeah, I'm really curious how the response is going to be to that, right? Like when we realize, oh, like this could actually be debased by the abundance of the cosmos. I mean, 99% of the gold in our system, probably 99.9% of the gold in our star system is actually in the sun. And
Yeah.
so like we just like shoot like magnetic plasma lances into the sun to kind of eject material and then process that plasma for heavy metals also, which would extend the life of our star. By the way, it would actually like removing impurities from the fusion process would
Mhm.
actually make our star last longer, which is kind of interesting. So yeah.
Oh man, I like that. I like that. I actually had a second part to my original.
Another thing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I feel like I get all excited. I feel like I'm pulling a fucking Neil deGrasse Tyson. I hate that guy. So please tell me if I'm being annoying. But
No, no, no.
also
I'm
the other
learning.
day I
So
saw that
the audience is
apparently
too.
fusion. And let me know. But apparently fusion power plants that create neutrons. They it's we discovered this. There was a paper published on something called Chrysopia, which is essentially basically saying that they can literally turn mercury into gold. Like every fusion reactor that is neutronic essentially can have like a blanket that of mercury in its design that would become a literal gold mine. Like it would produce every fusion reactor not only would produce abundant clean energy, but also it would produce gold, like multiple tons of it every year. And so yeah, that's just saying. Just like there, it could just become a waste byproduct of how we produce energy on this, and so in the future.
Sorry, I had to go. I had to go look it up. I
Hmm.
had to go look it up. Just to yeah, that is
Yeah, it,
super.
it, it was marathon fusion.
Yeah. Because I mean, I've obviously heard of like, the Philosopher's Stone and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And of course, transmutation. And of course, there's the
Yeah.
spiritual aspect of turning the lead of humanity into gold, right? Which is
Mhm.
essentially the purification process of humans and the consciousnse, right? So
Yeah.
this is pretty interesting. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Wasn't even familiar with this word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, but I did, yeah, I did. Sorry, I did have a second part to the question.
Mhm.
So I was mentioning those companies, right? IBM, Google, and I can't really. Who else? IBM, Google. There's a bunch of other quantum players like D
Mhm.
Wave and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
let me ask you this: which company? And this is not for investment or anything like that. I just want to know purely what you think based on what they're doing. Which one of these companies do you think are most like are you paying attention to the most for what they are doing, right? Like in terms of like I guess what they're doing is very important. So you're just focusing on what they're doing versus other players per se.
Yeah. There's
Are
like
they-
3 or 4 major players that come to mind already. And look, I'm never gonna like recommend stocks. I think
No, no,
stocks
of
are
course
fake
not.
and gay,
That's
and
why I prefaced it that
yeah,
way.
yeah.
It's like
Like
not for
I
investment, it's just to know.
right. Just like keep an eye on these companies because they're up to some shit. Is they're the first one that comes to mind is PsiQuantum. So I actually talked to the CEO of that company, and they're doing like an optical design. Still need to super cool the detectors, but it's more scalable, and they have some really interesting. I think it's like blueprint or something. They have some really interesting plans for how they intend to increase like entangled qubit fidelity and noise and thresholds and things like that, and of course qubit count, which is a factor, but it's not like the biggest factor necessarily. Um, and but the thing that really concerned me was when I actually talked to the CEO of Psyquantum at Presidio Bitcoin. I cornered him in the kitchen. I was like, bro, like, you gonna actually like use your technology to attack Bitcoin? And he was like, well, I wouldn't want to jeopardize our government contracts. And I was like, well, bro, like, I walked away, and I thought this as I was walking away. I was like, should I ask him if I could? I should have, because I eventually realized, wait a second, what if the government pays these fuckers to just attack Bitcoin and fill the SBR or something, right? Like that could be a possible future. Um,
I
yeah, I
mean,
don't know how I feel about that.
it's not out of the realm of possibilities. I mean, if
Yeah,
you take
yeah.
a look, right? If you take a look, the you know the government has obviously figured out a very lucrative way of essentially empowering private businesses to do their quote unquote dirty work,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, of
And
course. That's
and
how
if you
it's
think
always been
about
done.
it, right, to your point from earlier about the CIA and the FBI and these other
Hmm.
three-letter agencies,
Hmm.
um, the whole bunch of people that retire, right, from working in those places, but they're not done working, right? They then go to the private sector
Hmm.
where those
Through a
businesses
revolving
are
door.
conveniently set up
Hmm.
specifically for to make use of these people's, these people's abilities. So
Yeah, and so like in a similar vein, um,
no coincidence.
I think it's fair to look at the
Mhm.
investments that are being made from, like, this is spook technology, so you have to look at what they do. So there's like, of course, InQtel, what they've invested in the past. There's so for those who don't know, InQtel is essentially the private arm of the CIA, and
Yeah.
it essentially gets like $100 million of public funding every year to invest in spooky technologies, and then they have the gall to, I mean, this has been around since maybe 2010 or so, and they have the gall to tell the government they're only worth $1 billion.
They can say whatever. You know what? It's all a show sometimes,
Yeah,
right? It
yeah.
does seem sometimes it does seem like a show,
Oh, of course.
you
I
know.
mean, it's the yeah, fair enough. But there's also some other companies. So I know that was Honeywell and Raytheon were originally kind of, I think, the two contractors, along with the University of Maryland, that
Honeywell.
were involved with penetrating hard targets in 2013. And then Honeywell then later spun out their quantum unit. They called it Quintinuum, and
Okay, yeah,
and
I remember this one.
they're spooks. They're defense contractors. They're part of the military industrial complex. They're quintillionaires. They're, like, whatever, right? And so there's that, and then there's also there's of course the work that uh, IBM is doing
Yeah.
with like moving the needle in terms of software as well. Software is going to be a big part of this. Having efficient and reliable and useful software that's not just based in Python, but probably also Rust or something, right? Would probably be necessary. Their ideal with AMD is a positive direction, I think, if you're bullish on the whole concept. And then there's also I think the last I would just say call out as being like kind of like probably not a concern, but if they actually do what they say they're planning to accomplish, then it would be a big concern.
Mm.
Is I just don't think they're that credible, because the thing is, like, Microsoft's Majorana One announcement from last year was was really sus. Like,
Oh
they had to
yeah.
retract a paper. There was like, it was weird, and they had made some outrageous claims about essentially inventing a new state of matter, like a quasi particle called a Majorana fermion, and uh, like from a theoretical perspective, it has a lot of really appealing properties because these essentially uh, they kind of move the needle in terms of qubit design.
Mm,
Past we use Josephson junctions in supercooled environments for superconducting quantum computers, but they would just kind of move that even further, and they would not only would you have Cooper pairs, you'd have something like basically like you could make the Cooper pairs sort of act as if they had the same kind of properties as a Meyer on a fermion within them or something. And so I'm getting the weeds in physics, and I'm not a physicist, so like I mean like
and I'm
I
definitely
know, I
not.
understand like at a high level, like a boson fermion, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
but like a hadron, right? But and I'm studying particle physics or quantum mechanics, really, kind of like as like a side, because I'm interested in it, but only just to like understand your enemy, like, and
Yep.
um because like, to be clear, like, I mean, I look at all the quantum computing stuff, I look at the physicists, but they're ultimately like the enemy to me, in the game theory of this problem, which is post quantum cryptography is the shield against the sword of quantum computing.
Mm. So speaking of which, you are working because we've pretty much blown through this whole hour going. It's pretty crazy. It's awesome. But you and two other people, which I unfortunately I don't remember their names. I do apologize. I know you mentioned one earlier, Ethan, I believe.
Ethan Hellman, yeah.
Um, and who is the other person?
Her name is
Uh,
Isabel.
Isabel, right?
Mhm.
And Isabel Fox and Duke. That's
Mhm,
right.
mhm,
Okay, so you guys are co-authors of
mhm,
BIP 360, right? Which
mhm.
introduces post-quantum addresses.
Yep.
Okay, so the first question is, how does this? Let's say this gets approved, right? Let's say BIP 360 gets merged. What does this look like to the average pleb, the end user using Bitcoin? What does it look like for them?
Yeah. So,
Start there.
um, yeah. So basically, first of all, BIP 360 right now is a very conservative and well thought out change that essentially fixes a problem with taproot addresses, in which every valid taproot output is essentially a public key. It's based on a public key, and it is a public key, and it's just tweaked, but it's still a valid public key, because in order to tweak, you need to create essentially a key from the tweak, and then you can do ECAD or elliptic curve addition, basically, to tweak it. But because there's like kind of like a group, it's math anyway. Um,
It's
but yeah,
math. It's TLDR.
yeah,
It's math.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. I actually I had to go back to Grok the other day, and like, can you remind me of the difference between the commutative property, the associative property, and the distributive property? Like stuff like we learned in grade school, but like I was just like, oh wait, what was that
You got
again?
to go back and refresh.
Yeah, it's
I do
true.
it all the
It's true.
time. There's no
Yeah,
shame. There's no
yeah,
shame. You
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. And so anyway, BIP360, what it does is it basically takes the elliptic curve cryptography out of address generation for taproot style addresses that can support essentially the feature that you want, is to be able to pick from different spend paths from a sort of single commitment. And the commitment is the way that's done is using what's called a Merkle tree, and it's actually a Merkle a Merkleized alternative script tree, or mast. And that's actually a backronym of a different kind of mast, a different approach. There's some subtle differences between the older mast that was, I think, proposed back in 2015 or 2016, and what would eventually become activated in Taproot in 2021. And so, mhm. You look like you have a question.
I do, but I'm waiting for you to finish. I want you to finish your thought. I apologize.
No, 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 no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Because I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so we're gonna dumb it down even more. Okay, like, so to me, right? I'm going to go and spend. I'm gonna go spend my Bitcoin, right? Let's say BIP 360 gets merged, and so is it wallet providers that are going to have to add code? And if they do, is it going to be that you're going to be able to, because you just mentioned picking spend paths. Now, I guess I'm just kind of looking at it from like the average person who doesn't know anything about this. Like, to them, they're gonna be like, the hell's a spend path? I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, is it that you can choose to say, I want this to be quantum resistant or I don't?
Exactly.
Okay.
You can pick from which signature scheme you want to use when you go to spend your coins.
But let's say once we have quantum vulnerability, let's say, what would be the, I guess, would there, I can't seem to think of any benefit. And again, it's my ignorance. Like benefit
there's three
of not
options.
using quantum resistant, right?
Yeah, so you basically have three options that I can think of, even just with one additional PQC scheme, like say SLHDSA, which is hash based, which is very attractive to like cryptographers, because we can base it on SHA-2, and basically like we can base the signature algorithm on hashes, which we know are quantum resistant from what we know currently, at least at present, and so. And we know that SHA-2 has plenty of juice in it for quite some time, I think. Actually, I know might be a strong word for that, but it's generally accepted that SHA-2, I think, will have probably multiple decades still left in its viability. All cryptography technically has a half-life, right? But there's I'm pretty bullish on SHA-2, and so I think that it makes sense at this time to like basically evaluate, like, should we adopt novel cryptography like lattice cryptography that's based on the shortest independent vector problem versus like more conservative hash based approaches, which just are like they completely the asymmetry comes from a different mechanism called a one-time signature, which is also complicated, but also that's a rabbit hole. And how you basically like mitigate against the problem of one-time signatures, which is essentially that if you sign a message multiple times with the same private key with a one-time signature, like Winter Dance or Lamport, you essentially have to keep track of that, because you run the risk of accidentally exposing your private key when you sign if you sign it multiple times.
That makes
And that's a big problem for use cases like proof of reserve, and even more widespread is replaced by fee. Both those things
oh
essentially
yeah,
require
RBF. Yeah.
both those things sort of like require a key reuse in the course of using
Mhm.
Bitcoin. I think those are both legitimate use cases, and we will need to
Think of
be
that.
able to support those in the future. And there are ways to do that. It's just very complicated. But yeah, and then I feel like there was some other. It's a very complex topic. There's a lot of
It is. It's super complex.
threats. Yeah.
Um, it's okay though. I'm gonna keep it. I'm doing as best I can to keep it simple.
And
But
same here, man. Like, I mean,
oh, you're doing
there's a very
awesome.
like Stack Overflow component to this, where it's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. It's like there's so much because there's so much, and then there's so much more.
Yeah,
Okay, well,
one thing I heard
yeah.
about Bitcoin, by the way, that explains why it's so complicated, like where even plebs and experts alike are just like so oftentimes confounded and mystified and fascinated by it. And one of the reasons why I chose to dedicate my career to Bitcoin, essentially, it's a hyper object. It is bigger than any one thing.
Yes.
It's like the internet. It's like as big as that, right? But like it touches every aspect of society, essentially. Money, right? And so like if we could reinvent the money in a way that can't be unilaterally debased by fucking nation states and their irresponsible leaders, then yeah, like I think that's a good thing to dedicate our precious waking hours to, I think.
I agree. I definitely agree. So let me ask you this, because this is definitely a question that has come up so many times, and it's a fudding point.
A
For
fudding point.
shitcoiners.
It's like a selling point, but it's a fudding
Yeah,
point. I like
it's
that.
a
Yeah.
fudding point.
Yeah. And
Uh,
selling points is funny. They're very similar, because like you get all these fudsters. They just kind of circle
they crowd
around, and
around it.
yeah. It
The
is a bit of a selling point. Yeah, I agree with that.
the legacy addresses, right? Like this is something that comes up over and over again. So assuming Bitcoin has to
Are you talking like
migrate,
P2PKH or P2PK?
um, I
because
guess
they're
I'm just
both kind of considered legacy actually,
yeah. I guess I'm just
and there's
talking
a
about.
crucial distinction between them
Yeah,
from like a
I
quantum
guess I'm just
perspective.
talking about general, like the
Like
oldest,
old,
like specifically. How about this? How about specifically Satoshi's coins? Right, the famous Satoshi's coins.
yeah. So those are generally talked about. Those coins are P2PK um, keys, which like they aren't necessarily even Ava Chow would get on my case and call me stupid and dumb for saying that they're addresses. They're not addresses. They're keys. And
They're
oh,
keys.
fair enough. Okay, Ava. And so anyway, P2PKs they are fully exposed like
Yes.
65 byte or 33 byte public keys. It doesn't really even matter necessarily how many bytes are in the commitment. It's just so long as you can come up with the same commitment and convince all the other nodes that you came up with the right private key, then you're good. It doesn't even have to be the original private key, right? And so that's a bigger concern with P2PKH addresses. But the thing that protects those is that they're hashed, and generally hashes are secure except for those. Those are like 80 bits of security versus like 128 bits for a 256-bit hash. And so like P2 witness script hash, P2 script hash, I think those are both okay, but like the 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 I do worry a little bit about P2PKH, like
Mm.
the original, because like P2PKH did exist on the original Bitcoin client that was distributed and used in January 2009. It just wasn't the default for mining rewards, which is an interesting choice in hindsight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see where I'm going with that?
No,
Right? Okay, so like the
I'm
original.
reading. I'm reading as you're explaining, so that I can
Okay,
follow
okay,
along.
okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so
Yeah.
the thing is, when the original Bitcoin client came out in January 2009,
Yeah.
it had two different address types in it for essentially like to receive a payment, it would give you P2PKH address,
Mm-hmm.
um, but which is like base 58 encoded, but it would also generate public key addresses or keys or whatever you want to call them outputs for the purposes of mining rewards.
Until you spend it,
It,
hides the
well,
public key until spending.
no,
Right.
no, no, no.
No.
No, for
Oh no, wait.
mining
They're
rewards would go to
P2PKH.
a fully exposed public key, a P2PK
Hmm.
output, which
I was
like
reading the wrong one. I was reading KH. Sorry.
yeah, it's okay. It's so like the thing is, that's an interesting choice in hindsight because it essentially makes the people who might have lost their keys early on and not have realized the value of what they were doing. It could mean that maybe Satoshi intended for that supply to be returned to
Hmm.
circulation. Maybe that was his intention in that design choice, and that very interesting, fateful design choice that essentially puts the network in danger of like compromising its crypto economic security mechanism of mining and value, right? Like, if liquidators had their way, and then like the all 1.7 million coins from that era that are currently unspent and in pay to public key outputs,
Mhm.
they that essentially be, could have a very significant impact on the price if it's if they
Temporary,
become liquid too soon, too fast, right? Like you
correct.
could technically
But at this
move
point,
all of those within only the span of maybe 5 or 6 blocks.
hmm,
So maybe an hour, you'd have an hour of just like this massive dump of they could spend as much on fees as they want and still come out pretty well, so long as they had a good enough hardware to do that. And because these public keys are exposed and have been exposed for 15 or 16, 17, a long time, right? Like over a decade, well over a decade, uh, there's a possibility there was some primitive quantum computer just crunching in the background, computing all the private keys to those, and then, one day it all just moves. And all at once, and it tanks the markets. That's like the nightmare scenario. futsters would
Like it's
like you to
temporary
think of.
though. Yeah, but it's so that's the other
It's
thing, right? Like
that's a quick point. So that kind of transfer happens once. It goes into
exactly.
people's hands with a higher conviction.
Yeah.
They'll put it in a secure address format. It's not going to be like it won't end Bitcoin. It'll
No. It'll
it'll people what it'll do is it'll basically con a few like I've been using the term fags. Like if you're gonna sell your Bitcoin because of quantum FUD, to me you're a fag. Like that's how it works.
Oh gosh. Um, the other thing is that not just that it's temporary, but something else is as time goes on and as more of the supply, right, supply is mined, those coins seem to become less and less relevant. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously they reach a minimum of relevancy, right? Because when everything is mined, that's it, right? Like that's still 1 million coins, right? 1 million of the 21 million. But that is like essentially that's it.
Yeah.
Can't get any worse than that. This is what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just I don't know. So far when you've spent so much time listening to so much FUD, the first thing that comes to mind whenever I hear anything about any kind of threat is why am I being told this? What is the action that is being requested of me? Right? And who is requesting me to do this? I know there's two others, but I can't even remember them. But the point is that I appreciate people like you and Isabel and Ethan and obviously many other people that are contributing to Bitcoin being thoughtful and
Yes.
taking the time and not like it's like you don't it's like people don't need to concern troll, okay, in order to actually get some activity. However, when you want people to move in a specific direction and you wanted them to do it without thinking and to essentially hand you that responsibility, then people create these time sensitive scenarios where you must act and you must go in this direction.
Yeah, that's hard to preference fiat behavior. That's not
Yes.
how Bitcoin works. Bitcoin is uh, until I've given evidence otherwise, it's always been to me a meritocracy. And so if your concern actually does have merit and you do the work of essentially um, proving that we need to protect Bitcoin, then I have faith that uh, we'll come to a rough consensus on what needs to be done.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the other thing. That's the other thing too, right? Is that I find that oftentimes when it's like when you try to cross the abyss before you reach the abyss, usually you're not actually looking at it accurately,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, they say that being early is the same as being wrong.
Yeah, it's just a. All right, I've got another. I've got one last question, and then I'm gonna let you go free back to your life. I really
Well,
appreciate
I love talking about Bitcoin. I could talk about Bitcoin all day long.
that's
Don't worry about it.
that's awesome. Um, do you think? Okay, so I guess my last question. I'm gonna go in the direction of China, right? Why not? Because China is always part of the FUD. Um, do you think China's heavy or big quant? I don't even know how much they're investing in quantum, to be honest.
Oh, I
Uh,
mean, they're if you go by what the Chinese Communist Party will tell you, they're spending tens
yeah,
of billions.
exactly. So I don't really know. And of course, right?
But also the same people will also tell you that China has a population of over 1 billion people, which we're not quite even sure of that at this point.
Yeah,
They'll also tell you
1.8.
that their GDP figures are what they say, and then it turns out like when we actually compare lights at night, right, things that like we can quantifiably verify, we're like, oh, I think they're actually overestimating their GDP figures by at least 20%. Like and it's all part of like the misaligned incentives of the sort of command economy style reporting structure of these communists that they just like I mean the thing about China that's really redeems them is in after the Cultural Revolution and the horrors of that, and the Great Leap Forward of Mao, right? They put him in, after Mao died. They put into place a reformer. His name was Deng Xiaoping, and he in the late 70s, early 80s, I think he actually made a fateful trip to Japan to basically ask them at the height of their economic success what they did, what they did to contribute to the Japanese economic miracle, and the answer turned out to validate Austrian economics in that essentially
Uh-oh.
it's actually like the quintessential validating thing of Hayek's theory of the use of knowledge in society is that apparently their answer was you need a bank in every village. And if it was fateful advice because
Interesting.
he acted on that. He financialized and gave financial empowerment to billions of or hundreds of millions of Chinese, and at the time, and because they had some other things, but because of that, they essentially that fateful decision, that one thing that he did, arguably led to the rest of China's growing middle class.
Hmm.
And also, like people say, China, like doing business in China is very corrupt. Like corruption is like a part of doing business in China. It's just how they no. What they're doing is they're essentially being agorists. They're basically like creating black and gray markets to actually accomplish solving the economic problem, which is the distribution of scarce goods
Mhm.
using capitalism, which is the voluntary exchange of goods and services. And so they essentially are like voluntarily creating black and gray markets to not really necessarily subvert the state intentionally, but just resolve the economic equation of supply and demand, and essentially a free market that's not really regulated, aside from the fact that the like if you sidestep regulation, it becomes a free market again, right? And so that's essentially like validation of like both those things, like the what they call corruption, which is really just sidestepping state regulation, and what they call essentially like banking, they that essentially both those things essentially not only led to their success but validate Austrian theories of how economics should be done. And so I think Chinese people are some of the more creative and innovative and very cool people that I've ever talked to, but the government kind of sucks. And I will say, I will freely levy the same criticism to the United States and Americans,
Mm.
because like our deep state has done some horrifying shit. If you ever listen to Scott Horton or Whitney Webb, like it's just like wow, like oh that's a black pill. That's like
The
that's enough to like if you learn enough, you're like, oh, why am I paying taxes for this? Like that sucks,
oh,
So
one of the
uh
major. Oh, go ahead.
well, but to answer, I'm sorry to interrupt, but like it's just like one of the big to answer your question more directly, it's just
Yes.
China. I have complicated feelings toward them. I have complicated feelings towards my own government. But what I will tell you is that,
Of course.
yeah. What I will tell you is that, regardless of how much they're spending or what they're doing, they could pose a threat. The quality of research they put out is somewhat subpar. It's not necessarily indicative that they're any closer than any one of our abundant tech companies here working on that problem. Europe is basically like a non problem. They basically cooked themselves out of the quantum stuff pretty early on, which is kind of par for the course for Europe. The joke, of course, is their primary innovation is regulation. um, but also there's good things that come out of Europe as well, like ASML and Zeiss, and of course Brains, right? Like brains
Gold
are
mining.
basically the only people who are making their own ASICs, right? Like they're
Yeah, they are.
yeah, I think Brains is probably, well, where are they based? Like the Czech Republic or something?
Yeah,
Like
that's right.
yeah. If
So is
I'm very
Trezor.
bullish
Those
on
things.
all the stuff they do. They're
There's-
good on Rust. They have great people, and I think maybe the Czech Republic someday becomes sort of the new CERN or something, the new Switzerland, right?
The Czech Republic seems to have a very vibrant, how do I say this? Like,
Parallelly polis, right? Yeah,
yeah, but it's like this very vibrant kind of freedom based.
yeah,
I don't know if it's an environment or a culture or whatnot, but it's like
very
some of the
cool. Yeah,
coolest. Yeah,
yeah.
it's I don't know. It's nice. I don't know how they cultivated that, but it's like I'd like to learn.
Yeah, yeah. But
And that's
throughout
what it
history,
is, you know?
China's always played a boogeyman in all sorts of fun narratives, and I
Yeah,
mean,
and I
this
mean,
is
how
this
much
is
of
no
it is
different.
really true,
Yeah,
right? Like,
it's basically the same thing as we used to say of like the Soviet communists, the red
right,
commies are they're gonna we have a bomb gap. We need to build more bombs. We need to put more bullshit. We need to spend more money. We need to print more money and then spend it on weapons. And give it, it's just fucking it's
yeah,
surrounded by fucking saps, man, and these fucking
it's brutal.
these
It really is.
state listening to statists talk about, oh, they're gonna get you, they're gonna come after you if you do bad stuff, and I'm like, really, are they though? And even if they did, like, would it really matter? And like people are always like so like afraid of the state and compliant, and it's just like none of it's all fake. It's all
Yeah,
like, I mean, like, until the jackbooted thugs arrive to your doorstep in a country with the Second Amendment, yeah, I mean, we'll see how that goes. But
yeah,
until
exactly.
then, it's like I don't really think about the government like in a serious way. Really.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I mean, like, look, it's like I can't disagree with that. However, I do know that it again, right? It depends on what your pain points are, right? Like, because let's face it, the government, they can find the hell out of you, right? Like, if you
They
let's
can
say,
come up
right,
with legal fiction.
yeah, but then you have to waste your time fighting it, right? Like,
Do
this is
I?
well, do you? I mean, it depends, right? Like, if you don't pay your, let's say for example, right, you did pay taxes, then all of a sudden you stop paying taxes. Um, the
Well, so
IRS
so
can
so
definitely come
that's
after
actually
you, you
that's a
know?
great example. So
So, yeah.
it turns out that uh, so before you pay your taxes, you're supposed to file taxes.
Yes,
And the
correct.
thing of and the essential part, the thing to
It's
understand about filing
self-reporting.
taxes is it's not only like coercing information from you under the threat of force,
Yeah.
like it's essentially unconstitutional in 7 different ways.
Oh, I don't disagree with you whatsoever.
And not only that, uh, after the repeal of Chevron deference, the concept basically that
Mm.
this has happened in 2024, which basically meant that so Chevron deference was the sort of the legal policy, I guess, of basically deferring to the expertise of the agencies in charge of enforcing laws, which of course, like, to anybody who's skeptical of the state is going to be like, oh well, of course, that's
Yeah.
the state's favorite thing to do is like the fox guarding the hen house. They'll tell you how bad the problem is. They'll tell you how they're applying the law and how it's constitutional, and any arguments about the constitutionality to them are frivolous. Your constitutional rights are frivolous to these bureaucrats.
Oh, yeah.
And what's interesting about their argument that it's frivolous, well, that argument comes from them, and it turns out we don't have to listen to them anymore. And so, ultimately, courts. I think if it ever is challenged in courts, I think it should be the concept of filing taxes. Um, I think there's actually a very good reason for us to believe that, not only, I think that could be challenged, and rightly so. I don't think it should the onus should be on the individual to prove your income. That's I think, in fact, first of all, it's not necessary, and we know this because, like it's not necessary that that whole tax filing procedure, that's only in law. That was like ratified in the 50s. I think it was like section 6012. But that turns out to be unconstitutional, and the 16th Amendment does not, like, basically give the government the power to force us to give them information. That's not, and actually, I think the 10th Amendment basically covers, things that haven't been covered by the Constitution, like financial privacy.
Mhm.
There's, of course, a First Amendment case to be made about coercion of compelling speech, essentially.
Mhm.
There's a Fourth Amendment a case to be made for the unreasonable search and seizure. There's a Fifth Amendment case for due process and self-incrimination. There's a Ninth and Tenth Amendment. There's a 13th. There's a number, and of course the 16th doesn't even allow that. So like it is unconstitutional in a number of fucking ways. And if this does ever get challenged in court, by the way, that is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is sucking. These are parasites. There's more than 1 million tax filing prepare like parasites blood sucking industry out there that is all based on this stupid unconstitutional bullshit. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm ranting, but
No, no. I mean, I
I
don't
feel,
disagree with any of this.
yeah.
I
Anyway,
don't disagree with any of this. But you're absolutely right, and it's kind of this, it's kind of this delicate balance, right? Because, of course, you always end up seeing, they love to make examples of people, right? Look at what happened. Look at what happened.
Mhm.
He didn't pay his taxes.
Mhm.
He didn't do this. Now look at what happens, right? Because that's all you really need. And then a whole bunch of people are
Boogeyman.
just
Yeah.
censor. Yeah, of course, exactly. The boogeyman, and then people are just censoring themselves.
Yeah,
Right
yeah,
now,
yeah.
at that point, it's like, well, I'm gonna self-incriminate. That way, I'm okay. So it's. Well, I guess maybe self-incriminate is the wrong word. Incriminate's the wrong word, but
Comply.
yeah, exactly. Comply. So
Mhm.
self-report,
Mhm.
because that is what it is, right? To your
Mhm.
points from earlier. But yeah, man, Hunter, I'm gonna we're gonna cut it here. Unfortunately, I got a hard stop, but man, it really amazing to have you on the show. I'm watching BIP 360. I'm paying attention to what you, Ethan, and Isabella are doing. I really do appreciate your thoughtfulness, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah, man.
for giving me your platform. And I hope that all of the work that we've done will be helpful to plebs and people who don't necessarily have a technical background in understanding what the fuck these faggots at the NSA are doing to basically put your Bitcoin in jeopardy.
We're still in the then they fight you stage. We are still in the
Yep.
then they fight you
Oh,
stage, guys.
without a doubt.
Exactly. I hate it when people sit there and talk about we've already won. It's like, no, you
No.
don't understand what winning looks like. This isn't it. Anyways, but yeah, we're just gonna go on forever. But guys, if you want to see the work that Hunter Beast, Isabella, and Ethan are doing, the links are all in the show notes. And guys, that is gonna do it for this episode of Pleb Underground. Look, Monday we're back, right? We've got the daily news, 12:10 p.m. Eastern, and then don't forget, Monday evening, it's Bitcoin Tonight, 8:30 p.m. Myself, Sir Ulrich, and Humble Bitcoiner, Humble Warrior. We're going to be sitting down, and we are going to be talking about all the fun that's going on. Anyways, guys, have a great weekend, and Hunter Beast, once again, man, thank you so much for joining me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Cool. Take it easy. Just stay on for a second here when I end the stream.